I'm live. Hi. Yay, I'm so excited you guys are joining in. Just give it a few seconds. I think Bonnie will jump in. Oh, here we are.
Hi. Hello.
How are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
Good. It looks like you're somewhere so beautiful and gardeny.
Yeah, thanks. I was like, I should probably switch my camera around to look at the garden outside.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 Well, thanks everyone for joining us here on Made the Labels Instagram Live with Bonnie Wright. So today is National Agriculture Day. Happy
Yeah. Yeah. Happy National Agriculture Day. I'm pleased to be celebrating it with you.
Yes, I'm so excited to celebrate it with you too. We should virtually bake a cake or something.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yes,
Collect some things from the garden or in the woods.
yes, yes, I would love that. So for those of you just joining us, I am Indy and I'm on Instagram as Indy Aficionalis, and I'm an urban forager and food grower in the Los Angeles area. And I grow food in an area called Skid Row, which is a predominantly houseless population, and it predominantly consists of Black and brown folks. And so I have the privilege to grow food in this community, but even more importantly than growing food, I'm able to empower folks with the tools and education to grow their own food to help combat food deserts and food apartheid. So we'll be talking a little bit about that and just about our Western modern food systems. Bonnie, please tell us about yourself and what you've been up to.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear more about your work. And yeah, I guess my introduction into sort of environmental issues really focused first on ocean health and single-use plastics. And I think most people can agree that you have one way into sort of environmentalism and different things, and before you know it, you realize how everything is just deeply woven together and interconnected, and you start realizing that you can't really address one thing without addressing something else. You know, you can't really address any environmental issues without looking at the social impacts of those too. So for me, I would say my second greatest kind of curiosity has been, after ocean health, has been soil health. So that's really taken me into a lot of, I guess, more agricultural kind of subjects and issues, and just realizing the kind of how important our agricultural system is to our soil, and how if we don't kind of really address that, we're not really going to have an environment to grow our food in, which is a hugely terrifying kind of truth. So yeah, so I would say my two main interests are really ocean health and soil health.
Wow, yes, I totally agree with you on the soil health thing. I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's become really easy to think that growing your own food or helping to heal the food system just starts with seeds or starts with plants. In reality, it really starts at the very base layer, at the root layer. It's soil is kind of like, if we're comparing it to a person, soil is like the heart of a person. Without,
Mm-hmm.
we don't have anything fruitful coming. So I appreciate you touching on that. So how did you, we all know you from Harry Potter. How did you pivot from your life as an actress or still as an actress to caring about the planet and being this great steward of the earth?
Yeah, I guess it was, yeah, this first interest in ocean plastics. And I guess that was just from my sort of love for the space of kind of coastal communities, coastal towns. Like I've always loved sort of being by the water. And obviously you can just see firsthand, even in, England and America where I am now, that how just obvious that issue was. And I guess that was really like, how and what are we failing, or what system is failing us that this is happening? So I guess it was really my curiosity really that led me at first into it. And then I had the opportunity to go on a trip with Greenpeace and really learn a lot about kind of trawling for plastics and just like how much research has been continually done and how their work really looks at this kind of dual approach of the individual, but also like holding corporations and governments accountable. So I was kind of thrown into really understanding what campaigning really is through that experience, and kind of just was so inspired by their sort of enthusiasm on this ship. I kind of came home and was like, okay, I need to address my home and what can I be doing to change just my day-to-day kind of choices and habits. And then inevitably, we all have been there where we start trying to address small things and we just get totally overwhelmed. And we're just like, well, this system has been set up to like make us fail or make us not be able to make better choices that reflect our values. So yeah, it's kind of this continual kind of drive for this dual approach. Like how do I kind of use, I guess, my platform to inspire people with those just daily choices that you can make, but also not assuming that like the weight of this issue should be just on our shoulders. We should be kind of shifting that responsibility back to either brands or either, the people who are representing us in politics.
Yes, definitely. I think that just like you mentioned, it's so easy to feel the burden as an individual once you start really delving into these areas
Mm-hmm.
where the planet is really suffering. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I can't use plastic anymore. And I have to like put everything in glass jars. So that kind of brings me to the point of like, what is one small step that an individual can take just
Mm-hmm.
they are without spending any money or without doing anything to just make their life a little bit more greener, a little bit more environmentally friendly?
I mean, yeah, I think through the lens of this, the National Agricultural Day and looking at food systems, I think what was really interesting about like last year and the kind of beginning of the pandemic is suddenly these things were not available. Like suddenly we realized we were part of the supply chain. We realized that like these sudden unpredicted items that people now wanted. I mean, obviously the kind of one that became the more humorous one was like toilet paper, this idea. Suddenly like there was no toilet paper. So you suddenly realize for a lot of people, like, oh, whoa, we're deeply woven into these things that like more choices or more purchases of that makes things change. And that is massively kind of happens in food systems. Obviously, either, there could be weather changing that or just the demand of certain things changing that. And I think one really great way to become more connected to your food system is to kind of understand your seasons more, I think, and understand like, okay, I live in this area and it's coming into spring and these are the things that are going to be more available to me, closer to me. So you could look up, just type in your city, like what's coming into season, and without having to really do a lot of research to see if like that farm is X amount of miles from you, you're, I think, naturally and inevitably going to be shortening your food supply chain because you're buying slightly more seasonal things. And I think it's just a nice way to like, yeah, bring you back to the fact that we rely on, seasons and nature's kind of changes. So I think it's a nice way to, yeah, just look up your local city and what's in season and, and try in any way you can to shop accordingly to that season.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I feel the same way. And I think you touched on such a great point that when the pandemic started, so many folks were realizing, hey, the lines at the grocery store are so long, I'm not able to
Mm-hmm.
get that I'm usually used to getting. And people started really finding out and realizing the source of their food is an actual
Mm-hmm.
human being, is an
Yeah.
actual. And it brings us to this idea of food deserts. So for me personally, growing up, I grew up in a really small town, a really agricultural based town.
Mhm.
And when I talk to people about it, they're like, oh my gosh, you must have had all of this great food growing up, all of these fresh squashes and things. But that was absolutely not the case, because the idea that, like, the cobbler's kids never have any shoes. It's like
Yeah.
great foods that are being grown in my town were just being exported. And so we were just left with the negative soil impacts and the polluted water that comes from just regular standard agriculture that's not regenerative. So as I grew up and realized that just because someone's growing their own food doesn't mean that they're eating fresh grown food, as they're growing their own food doesn't mean that they're doing it in a way that's sustainable or healthy at all for the planet. So once I started realizing that a little bit, I wanted to just grow my own food and eat more organically and grow organic food. And then I realized how easy it was. If you just start with a pack of seeds that you get from your grocery store and
Mhm.
just and put it into some soil that you find in your backyard, and obviously expand your knowledge from there. But just starting small with just something like you mentioned that's in season, and just
Mhm.
life cycle take off, and seeing how it goes from a sprout to a seedling into this thing that eventually you keep watering and giving sunlight to, and you get to harvest from, is really beautiful and helps strengthen that connection with your own food. But we see in Los Angeles a lot, like I mentioned, in the area where I work, where people are mostly homeless and live in tents. They aren't able to access, even if they could access seeds, they don't have a place to grow their own food. So
Mhm.
think it's really important to put these community gardens in areas where there's just no access to even grocery stores, so that people can begin being able to get back to the land and grow their own food. Growing up, did you have a garden, or did you grow your own?
No, I grew up like right in the middle of London, and we had like a rooftop, but it had like some pots on it, but it was never like, nothing was ever grown to eat. Like that was never even kind of a concept for me growing up, or this idea that it would be possible. But like we definitely could have, it just didn't sort of cross our mind. And I think, like you say, it's that, the freedom and empowerment that you can get from growing something, witnessing something growing from seed, and also just the challenges that you easily face too with that. Um, and just, yeah, I think it's like this idea of like food sovereignty too, obviously for so many communities, as you were saying, like where you grew up, the idea that like it's just to export food is what is needed. And obviously then systems start becoming in place. I think there's obviously so many kind of kind of chain reactions. A lot of things, there's obviously so much like fast food and processed food that then comes in to certain communities who are maybe growing, like you say, but have to export that. So I think to be able to then either have it so there's more fair system, so you could have kept some of that food for your community, or whether or not it's kind of about reconnecting people to those practices, or giving back that land, or having the accessibility to that land in order for that kind of freedom basically you get by being able to grow your own food. It's this kind of very like simple, powerful thing. And I think going back to the pandemic, I think also just this highlight of um, essential business, essential workers, and how there was this kind of real sort of highlight of how, farmers, people working on the land here in America, how unjust that they were being sort of respected and treated for being highly essential workers for our kind of day-to-day survival. And I think it just highlights just how out of sight, out of mind often those things can be. Like we just don't think about it. We just like buy it in the store and think it kind of just appeared.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such a great point. Is I, even as a person who grows food, didn't realize that I was an essential worker
Mm-hmm.
started, because as my friends unfortunately weren't able to work anymore, I kept going to work and kept growing food and kept giving it away to the community, and going into these areas that are really, just not physically safe, and trying to grow food and help other people grow food. It made me really realize what an important job it is to be a farmer. And then just creating a larger community and branching out to other farmers and other migrant workers. Here in the US, we have a lot of migrant farm workers who come from Mexico. and are just unable to access, like we mentioned, unable to access the produce that they grow and are
Mhm.
access healthcare. And so I think it's incredible that as humans, we're starting to kind of evolve and starting to understand a bit that healthy food is really important and organic food is important. And we see that when we go to these grocery stores and there's an organic section. But I think that we're still kind of forgetting about the farmers behind the work. And I think that's why days like today, National Agriculture Day, is really important and incredible. I think it's a great day where we can just go out and thank our farmers, and not just like the farmers that you see at the farmers market, but
Mhm.
helping out some of the farmers that you don't see, who are migrant farm workers that are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. Yeah, so that brings me to the question of, what do you think is something that people could do, just one thing that they could do for National Agriculture Day to just kind of pay tribute to
Yeah.
people?
Yeah, oh, that's a tough one. I think honestly, just that practice of, like you're saying, that gratitude, I think too, of like really just using your imagination to imagine all the different, like we're all so deeply woven into so many systems, like nothing is in isolation, like everything needs something else. And I think just trying to, through your own imagination, and it doesn't have to be, this doesn't have to be like a whole piece of, a vegetable or a fruit. This could be a meal or a pack, something that's already pre-prepared, but just trying to imagine the kind of layers of stages that has gone through, the different hands and livelihoods that's affected to get to you, I think is just a really important thing. I think people, talk about like conscious consumerism and all those kind of things. I think to actually really consciously go through those stages today could be a nice way to just really picture and imagine things before it's just in your like. And I think by doing that often, you also like you're just naturally like the nourishment, I think sometimes you can feel from that is like more abundant and more like, oh wow, this isn't just a flippant choice that I made to just buy something. Like it's not this like grab and go kind of idea of consumption. It's like actually mindfully eating it, I think is a great thing to do. And I think maybe too, I'd be interested to hear about from you how, for some people they might want to physically take part, whether that's like community gardens or like programs in their local area. I'd love to hear more about like how you got involved in those programs in LA and maybe how other people could, because I know for me that's something I've always been kind of interested in. There's so many great organizations that definitely exist across the country and internationally.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, growing up, I didn't have access to a lot of fresh or organic produce. And once I started realizing that I really want to learn how to grow food, I found that it's the best to just go to your community gardens, and you can just look online at community gardens near me. And folks that manage community gardens always need help. There's always work to be done, and there's always volunteers that could, just help beautify the area and help the garden grow more food. So I would really recommend that folks just reach out to their local community gardens and see if you can get involved, getting your hands in the soil. I think that food growing shouldn't be a thing that we need to do in a vacuum and all alone. It should be something that's a part of community, just like eating should be something that we do as a community. So I think being connected with the individuals in your neighborhood and just helping to improve the lives of folks that live near you is really important. And then also too, foraging. So I think that foraging often gets left out of this conversation of agriculture because it's a little bit more rogue. And for those of
Mm-hmm.
us who are listening and are like, what is foraging? Foraging is simply the act of going out and finding and identifying edible or medicinal plants that are near you and harvesting them ethically. And I think that this can be a really incredible way of supplementing your food sources. So it's definitely really difficult to try to grow all of your own food, but amazingly, there's an abundance of fresh wild food growing in almost every area. I've never met someone who lives somewhere where there isn't any food growing. And in moving to Los Angeles, I thought that maybe there wouldn't be anywhere for me to forage anymore because I'm from the mountains and there's abundance of mushrooms. But I've really gotten into urban foraging and just going out and finding these citrus trees and these wild greens, even dandelions,
Mm-hmm.
really medicinal. So just creating this connection with foods that are growing just at your feet that you pass every day, I think can kind of strengthen your tie to the planet and make you have more reverence for the outdoors. Do you ever do any foraging? Do you ever?
It's funny. I feel like I more have memories of like being a child doing things like that. Like blackberries at the end of summer were like everywhere and abundant in England. That was like the one berry that I used to love, and we used to go and pick blackberries and like bake things with it. But it's funny. I guess the only thing you mainly like pass here a lot, especially right now, is like so many citrus trees. You know, you definitely didn't have that in England, so it's nice in California, like how that's like this whole other thing. And like you say, it's interesting when you move places how it can entirely shift either where you're finding things or just like what grows there is kind of a nice like reflection of where you are in that moment. But it's funny, I kind of I think it's just the awareness of like what is edible or what could be taken is definitely something that I always wish I knew more about. Like even just things you realize, like the sap of some trees can even be, you know, had. Like it's not the most obvious thing sometimes when it comes to foraging. But I've never got into it that much. I would love to and like understand it more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one cool thing about foragers is we're always open to share a lot of our
Mhm.
information. Everyone should have access to education. Everyone should have access to healthcare and access to fresh food. And so just being able to share this kind of knowledge with my community, I find really important. And a lot of the folks that I learned from and a lot of my teachers feel the same way and kind of passed that reverence for the land on to me. So
Mhm.
out there and you're like, hey, I really want to get into foraging, but I don't want to, eat a weird mushroom and die.
Yeah.
I would definitely recommend just, again, looking up local foraging in your area and different
Mhm.
on classes that you can take, because not only are you just growing your own knowledge, but you're supporting this lifestyle and this continued education, because it could quickly become a lost art if folks are more reliant on just purchasing food from the grocery store and purchasing food online even. So I think it's really important to support people who are continuing this style of education.
Yeah, I agree. I think that kind of like skill sharing of things and those storytelling elements to these practices and just the knowledge is so easily kind of forgotten too. I think when you think already about what the agricultural system has done to a colonized country that we're in, like just even that loss of knowledge, practices that obviously are now so much more coming back to the forefront, sometimes like renamed and maybe sort of westernized. But I think, yeah, there's obviously so much that could be forgotten if it's not passed on. And I do think a lot of it starts with our curiosity to want to know those things or ask those questions, or and like you say, most people when you ask them they want to share that knowledge. I think it's sometimes daunting and overwhelming to like where to start. Like I don't want to ask the wrong question. I think there really is no like wrong question that people can ask to get into it. That's definitely been what's kind of pushed me always onwards, is just that continual curiosity and like not being afraid to ask the questions, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, not being afraid to ask the questions. And then also growing food and finding food in itself can be its own sort of language. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot that I've worked with in the past were not native English speakers. And so there was that language barrier, but we were still able to work in the garden together so beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing some of the similar foods that we ate and enjoyed growing up, I think you'll just see the spark in someone's eye when you ask them like, what are some of your favorite foods that you ate and
Mm-hmm.
growing up? And for me, I definitely love hot peppers, and I've noticed that a lot of the people that I'm in community with and grow food with love eating hot peppers too.
Mm-hmm.
Just growing these peppers in the garden and really tapping into this idea of ethnobotany, or just this convergence of plants and how they co-evolved with people, is really important, because without plants, people wouldn't be able to evolve and vice versa. So humans who were the original carriers of seeds, and we're the ones who really helped create some of the varieties that we see today. So I think it's really important to not try to strip away the individual from the growing experience. But what are some of your favorite foods? Just like your favorite.
I actually I'm like very obsessed with potatoes. I love potatoes. I love all very like in earth, in the soil, deeply rooted vegetables, which is probably a reflection too of like the kind of things that would have grown more, particularly in England, rather than like from now living in California. So yeah, I love like from potatoes to carrots to beets to like parsnips and celery root, all those kind of things I love a lot. And I think it's interesting too how you mention how, you know, the act of growing and growing in community can be a very social kind of thing, and it can bring people together. And I think we're so used to food and eating bringing people together, and like the social element of, you know, going to a restaurant, going to a cafe, getting takeout, like all those things have become so like an activity we do all the kind of time, or accepted or thought to do all the time. Yet the other side of it we don't see to be this kind of social side. And it would be lovely if the same amount of kind of enjoyment and community was like experienced in that side of things. I think because I think too it's been an interesting year where people have wanted to, you know, there's been a lot of that idea of the victory garden that obviously came around in certain kind of wars where people would not be able to rely on the system because of rationing, and then they would go and be growing their own food. And I think it's just kind of interesting that that came out again of this pandemic, this idea of like self-sufficiency and like, oh, wait a minute, I can do this myself, or like I've now got a little bit more time to do that, or it's just becoming a more kind of fashion, you know, as fashions kind of change too.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. A few people have asked me something like, "Oh, do you think that it's frustrating that people find growing their own food and foraging so trendy now?" And
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because it can only get better. It's just so incredible that people are really investing their time and energy into growing their own food and just spending more time in nature. And it's really unfortunate that the pandemic was kind of the
Mm-hmm.
for all of this. But it is lovely because I think that over time, as you know, as things get better and as we start to open the world back up a little bit, people will carry these skills with them and will realize that the whole time they had the ability to grow their own food, the whole time they had this ability to just go out and hike and enjoy nature and, you know, look at it and communicate with it. I don't think that growing your own food and foraging has to be this really labor intensive thing. I
Mm-hmm.
always tell people that if it's really hard work and it's really labor intensive, then maybe you're not doing it right. You should really just enjoy growing your own food, and there's no reason to put this added pressure on yourself. And you know, there's if you're just growing for your own family and growing for your own community, you know, you can take your time, you can sing to your plants, you can, you know, hold your seeds for as long as you want to, and just really put that positive energy into the soil, and in turn you'll have really lovely crops. So we're close to the end of our time. Man, it's been so much fun
Yeah,
talking.
it's been great. I wanted to add to what you're saying. I think that like my experience, like I've had multiple like starts of trying to grow things. It doesn't quite work, and there's lots of kind of experimenting, and there can be things that can go wrong and feel frustrating. And I think, like you say, sometimes you spread yourself so wide and you're like, oh, I want to grow all these different things and I like this, and you start buying seeds and it's like, oh gosh, I can't, this is too many things. And just simplifying it, even if like, you know, you just have a window ledge that you want to grow 3 herbs on, like just starting really small with just 3 small pots. Like it doesn't have to be this access to, you know, make a raised bed or start growing a whole, you know, all your food at once. I think it can be just one small thing, like choosing your 2 favorite herbs that you like to put on your food and things like that. Just like a slow, because often, yeah, it's either overwhelming or can be frustrating when like it all kind of goes to, it just dies. It's can be sometimes like frustrating. And I've definitely been there with like over committing to things. So I think, yeah, it can just start in really small ways. And the whole pandemic, while it's sad that it is what kind of forced a pause, like I think it's really interesting, in days like National Agricultural Day are these kind of pauses that you can be like, oh, like just look outside of your kind of habits and day-to-day thing and just kind of mindfully contemplate like agriculture, what that word even means, what that system is.
Definitely, definitely. And yeah, that's such a good point. I was thinking that just one thing that I always want people to take away, and especially today on National Agriculture Day, is like you mentioned, just start with a simple herb that you eat all the time. Like I love to eat, apple, and I think that might have been one of the first plants I ever grew. And you can do something as simple as like taking, I do this with a lot with the folks on Skid Row because they don't have access to pots. So we'll just take like used yogurt containers,
Mm-hmm.
poke holes in the bottom of them, and then just put in soil and plant seeds using that, because it doesn't have to be this thing that you spend a lot of money doing, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. And if your plants die, that's fine. I
Yeah.
will get caught up in this. But, I have a graveyard of failed plant experiments, and the great thing is it all turns back into compost.
Yeah,
And
exactly. All goes around. It's never lost. Yeah.
yes, 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 renewable.
Yeah.
Um, well, thank you so much for
Yeah,
taking
thank you.
out with us at Made the Label for this National Agriculture Day. Do you have any last thoughts, any last well wishes to send everyone off into the world with?
No, I would just say that, yeah, I'm really inspired by what you share on your page. So I'd really inspire everyone to go over and just follow your work. And I always I feel like all the imagery that you share and document through your foraging is always just like so beautiful and feels like such a celebration of like nature and color and what's there. So yeah, thank you. It's been really great to connect. And yeah, happy National Agriculture Day.
Yay, thank you as well. National Agriculture Day. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Bye. Thanks.